She swore she'd never leave, until you became weak. Nietzsche once said, "When a woman loves, she wants your strength, not your struggle." The tragedy? Most men confuse loyalty with love and weakness with honesty. But loyalty built on emotion is as fragile as glass, beautiful but doomed to shatter. This is not a story of betrayal, it's a story of revelation. The day a man learned what loyalty truly means, when it no longer belonged to him. He used to believe loyalty was the ultimate proof of love. Not money, not beauty, not even passion, just loyalty. He thought if he gave enough of himself, if he showed enough devotion, she'd stay, through storms, through failures, through the inevitable cracks of being human. But Nietzsche warned us long ago. When a woman loves, she loves not the man, but his strength. What he meant wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. To the philosopher, love was never selfless. It was instinct dressed in poetry. And this man, let's call him Adrian, had mistaken poetry for truth. Adrian's life had rhythm, mornings filled with achievement, nights filled with warmth. She'd greet him at the door, smile faintly, ask how his day had been. He'd speak of meetings, deadlines, ambitions, and in her eyes he saw reflection. Not admiration, perhaps, but presence. He mistook that presence for permanence. Every glance, every soft word became proof of devotion. He thought he had found what most men chase their whole lives. A woman who would stand beside him even when the world turned dark. But Nietzsche would have smiled at his innocence. Love is the state in which man sees things most as they are not. For beneath her calm eyes a quiet storm was gathering. She didn't want his comfort. She wanted his fire, the wildness that once made him unreachable. And slowly, without noticing, Adrian stopped being fire. He became warmth. Warmth is safe. Warmth is loyal. Warmth is predictable. But warmth is not what the feminine soul worships. It didn't happen in a single argument or betrayal. It began invisibly, like dust gathering on glass. Small things, a tone too gentle when she was cruel, a silence too long when she was distant, a question avoided when she tested his resolve. She'd make little remarks. "You've changed," or "You don't challenge me anymore." He'd laugh them off. He thought love meant patience. He thought loyalty was about endurance. But Nietzsche wrote, "There is always some madness in love, but there is also always some reason in madness." Her madness was craving a man who could stand against her waves, not one who'd drown in them. And so, bit by bit, she began to look elsewhere. Not for another man, but for the version of him she had first fallen for. The man who didn't ask, "Are you happy?" but the man who simply was happiness, because his purpose burned too brightly to seek validation. It was an ordinary evening, quiet, almost tender. He spoke of plans for the future. She smiled, but her eyes didn't match the smile. That's the strange cruelty of love. The body stays loyal long after the heart is left. When she finally turned away that night, he felt a silence so heavy it swallowed the air. No words, no accusations, just the quiet confirmation of distance. He stayed awake that night, staring at the ceiling. He thought of every promise, every gentle moment, every whispered, "I'll never leave." And for the first time, he doubted it. Not because she lied, but because human loyalty is fragile when faced with fading strength. Nietzsche understood this with terrifying precision. The surest way to corrupt a man is to teach him to value what does not belong to him. Adrian valued her love as if it were his property, when it had always been a reflection of his own vitality. When he dimmed, the reflection disappeared. In his journal, one he never showed her, Adrian began writing fragments, not letters, thoughts, questions. Each night, he'd pour pieces of himself into those pages. Why does love turn cold when I give too much? Why do I feel smaller when I try to be kind? Why does she pull away when I reach out? He didn't know it yet, but he was rediscovering something Nietzsche had lived and died with. The tension between power and affection. Love demands vulnerability, but the moment vulnerability becomes dependence, love begins to rot. Nietzsche's relationships were proof of it. He loved women who admired his mind, until they saw his humanity. Then they vanished. So he turned his pain into philosophy. He wrote not to heal, but to understand. He believed loyalty is not an act of virtue, it is an act of alignment. And alignment only exists when both remain true to their higher selves. Adrian, however, had betrayed his own strength for peace. And peace, as Nietzsche warned, often hides the decay of spirit. Weeks passed. The relationship continued. Polite, surface level, but hollow. They laughed at dinners, but the laughter was rehearsed. They shared beds, but their dreams no longer met in the middle. One morning, he caught himself staring at her reflection in the mirror. She was beautiful, effortlessly, tragically beautiful. But beauty without connection is like sunlight through glass. It warms, but it never touches. He realized then that he wasn't afraid of losing her. He was afraid of being nothing without her. That was the darkest truth Nietzsche ever revealed. He who cannot command himself will always be commanded. And that's what he had become, a man commanded by his longing. Loyalty, he finally understood, wasn't her duty. It was his illusion. For loyalty to exist, one must remain worthy of it. And worthiness doesn't come from love. It comes from inner sovereignty. Imagine Nietzsche watching from the distance, a quiet observer in the theater of human frailty. He would not mock Adrian nor pity him. He would simply nod, knowing the pattern. Man does not strive for happiness. Only the Englishman does. Happiness, Nietzsche believed, was not the goal. Strength was. And from strength, true connection emerges. Not as need, but as resonance. Adrian's tragedy was that he had built love on comfort instead of courage. He wanted peace when he should have embraced chaos. He wanted harmony when he should have demanded truth. And so, when the day finally came, when her eyes no longer searched for him in a room, he didn't fight. He didn't beg. He simply broke. Quietly, beautifully, like glass remembering its fragility. Pain, Nietzsche said, is the birth of wisdom. And so Adrian's suffering became his initiation. In the ashes of his devotion, a new awareness was born. Love cannot save you, only discipline can. Loyalty cannot bind another, only strength commands respect. He looked at himself one last time in the mirror, a man stripped of illusion, but clothed in truth. The reflection stared back, weary but alive. The man who has a why to live can bear almost any how. He had found his why, not her, not love, but the will to never again lose himself in someone else's shadow. The story doesn't end with loss. It begins with awakening, because the next time he sees her, or anyone, he will no longer seek loyalty. He will embody it. To understand why love fades, we must understand what truly keeps it alive. Respect born of strength. The days had grown quieter. Not in the comforting way silence used to fall between them. That kind of silence once meant peace, contentment, the still rhythm of two souls resting together. Now the silence had weight. It pressed between every word, every glance, every dinner they shared without really tasting anything. Elias sat at his desk, fingers grazing the rim of his untouched coffee cup. The steam had long disappeared, just as warmth had drained from their late-night talks. He watched the morning light fall across the wall, tracing patterns of gold and shadow. For a long moment he thought about Nietzsche's words again. Love is not consolation. It is light. He wondered when their light had dimmed. Amara used to laugh like sunlight breaking through clouds. Now she smiled in fragments, polite, reserved. Her phone screen often glowed long into the night, her back turned to him. He didn't ask. Not because he didn't care, but because he was afraid of the answer. In the early days, he believed her loyalty was something sacred, a truth beyond question. But slowly, he began to realize loyalty wasn't an emotion, it was a choice, and like all choices, it could be withdrawn. One evening, as rain ticked against the window, he found himself revisiting old journals. Between his scribbles of philosophy and fragments of poetry, he had written something years ago, a line that now stung like truth revealed too late. Loyalty is strongest when love feels weakest, but only one side ever proves it. Amara entered the room quietly. Her voice was gentle but distant. Are you writing again? Yes, he said, eyes still on the page. About me? she asked, half teasing, half defensive. He looked up, not at her, but through her. I don't write about people anymore, he said softly. I write about ghosts. She hesitated. Then I guess I'm one of them. Her laughter followed, short, hollow. She left before he could reply. That night, sleep refused to come. Instead, he walked through the empty streets, the sound of his footsteps echoing off the rain-slick pavement. The city lights blurred into streaks of orange and white. He passed a bookstore, still lit despite the late hour. In the window, a display of Nietzsche's works caught his eye. Beyond Good and Evil, The Gay Science, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He remembered something from Zarathustra. When you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. He wondered if love was an abyss, a beautiful one, but still a pit that consumed all who believed too deeply. Maybe loyalty was never meant to last forever. Maybe it only lived as long as love remained useful. The following day, Amara spoke first. We need space, she said simply, as if stating the weather. Space, Elias repeated, his voice empty. How much? I don't know, she said. Just enough to breathe again. He almost smiled. I thought we were each other's breath. Amara looked down. Maybe that's why we're suffocating. Her words were precise, not cruel but final. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. That night he moved to his study. The violin she once gifted him sat untouched in its case. Dust had gathered across its strings, fragile, temporary, like faith. He opened it, plucked a single note. The sound quivered, thin and uncertain. In the stillness, Nietzsche's shadow seemed to whisper again. There is always some madness in love, but there is also always some reason in madness. Days turned into weeks. Elias wrote obsessively, fragments of thought, confessions disguised as philosophy. Each page felt like peeling another layer of his illusions. He wrote, loyalty is not about love, it's about fear. Women are loyal until their instincts tell them the ship is sinking. Men are loyal even when they know it already has. And beneath that, in smaller handwriting, maybe loyalty is just the polite word for comfort. One evening, he saw Amara again, by chance. She stood outside a cafe, laughing with someone. Her eyes shone with the warmth he hadn't seen in months. The man beside her touched her shoulder lightly, the way Elias once did. It was a simple gesture, but it shattered something fragile inside him. He didn't confront her. He didn't call. He just watched. And for the first time, he didn't feel anger, only a strange, detached clarity. He remembered Nietzsche's line, what is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil. Maybe she wasn't wrong. Maybe neither of them were. They had both simply obeyed their nature. That night he returned home and sat by the fire, a glass of wine in hand. The flames flickered across his face as he whispered, maybe loyalty isn't broken. Maybe it just changes shape. He closed his eyes. In his dreams he saw her, not Amara, but the idea of her, eternal, untouchable, walking away across an endless field. He woke before dawn, the line from his dream still echoing in his mind. Love dies when it stops being worshipped. He finally understood what Nietzsche meant, that love, once idolized, inevitably falls. And when it falls, loyalty crumbles beneath it like old stone. The temptation of forgetting. Where Elias meets someone new who mirrors Amara's light, but hides a deeper test of loyalty and illusion. Weeks passed like blurred pages in a book he no longer cared to read. Elias's home had grown colder, not from the weather, but from absence. The scent of her perfume had faded, but sometimes when he passed by the window where she used to sit, he could still feel a phantom presence, that invisible residue of love that lingers after the body's gone. He had stopped writing about her. Now he wrote about truth, or at least what he thought truth was. Men love ideal, he scribbled one night. Women love the feeling of being idealized. When the mirror breaks, both walk away bleeding. He paused. The ink dripped, smearing across the page. The sentence felt alive, too sharp, too real. He almost tore it out, but didn't. He left it there, a confession in disguise. That evening he went to a small bar, one of those forgotten places that smelled of rain, whiskey, and lost dreams. The walls were covered with yellowed photos of musicians, their smiles eternal in sepia. He ordered a drink, then another, and then she walked in. She was nothing like Amara, at least not at first glance. Her hair was shorter, her presence quieter, but her eyes, they carried the same haunting intelligence, the kind that looked through you, not at you. She sat 2 seats away and ordered wine. Their eyes met, not by accident, but by design. "Do you believe in second chances?" she asked unprompted, swirling the glass in her hand. Elias blinked. "Depends who's asking." She smiled faintly. "Someone who doesn't believe in first ones." Her name was Celine, the kind of name that sounded like a whisper from another life. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, about music, about why people pretend they don't care, about the strange ache that follows love even when it's over. There was something effortless about her, and yet something dangerous. She didn't ask questions that led to comfort. She asked the kind that led to confession. "You still love her, don't you?" Celine said softly. Elias hesitated. "I'm not sure if it's love anymore. Maybe it's just habit." Celine leaned closer, eyes reflecting the dim light. "Habit," she repeated, almost tenderly. "That's what loyalty turns into when the fire dies." Her words struck like a chord in a forgotten melody. He laughed bitterly. "You sound like Nietzsche," she smiled. "Maybe I just learned from the same pain." Days turned into nights, and nights into quiet addictions. Celine was not Amara. She didn't promise forever, and maybe that's why Elias found peace in her presence. There was no expectation, no illusion of permanence. She came and went like moonlight, never fully his, never fully gone. But something strange began to happen. Every time Celine left, he felt a deeper pull, not of love, but of dependency. She became the mirror he couldn't look away from. One night, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the sleeping city, Celine turned to him and asked, "Why do you still write about her?" Elias looked up. "Because she was real." Celine shook her head. "No, she was your idea of real. That's what you men do. You love an illusion, then hate the woman for not being it." He stared at her, words failing. She continued, her tone calm but piercing. "Women don't betray you, Elias. You betray yourselves by expecting angels from those made of flesh." He exhaled slowly. "You sound like you've practiced that speech." "Maybe I have," she said. "Maybe every woman does." That night he couldn't sleep. Her words replayed in his head like an echo that refused to fade. He opened Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, letting the pages fall open where they may. His eyes landed on a line. "In revenge and in love, woman is more barbarous than man." He closed the book. The words unsettled him, not because they were cruel, but because they felt true. The next morning he found Celine gone. No note, no message, just the faint scent of her perfume on the pillow. He sat by the window for hours, watching the world wake without her. By evening she returned, calm, unapologetic. "Where were you?" he asked, voice tight. "Nowhere," she said with a faint smile. "Just remembering what freedom feels like." He frowned. "And I'm the cage?" She looked at him with gentle pity. "No, Elias. You're just the dream I like to visit before I wake up." Her words hit harder than any betrayal. He stood trembling slightly. "Then why come back at all?" She took a step closer. "Because pain tastes sweeter when it's familiar." That night they didn't speak. She fell asleep beside him, peaceful and distant, while he lay awake staring at the ceiling, his mind filled with Nietzsche's voice. Man was made for woman's delight, but woman was made for man's trial. He began to see it, the pattern. Amara's love, Celine's indifference, both were mirrors reflecting the same truth. Women test loyalty not because they are cruel, but because loyalty itself is fragile. Elias realized he had never truly loved either woman. He had loved the feeling of being needed. Weeks passed. Their connection grew stranger, half passion, half philosophy. They spent nights talking about the morality of love, about how loyalty is both a virtue and a curse. "Do you believe in faithful love?" he asked one night. Celine smiled faintly. "Faithful to what? The person or the idea?" He didn't answer. She leaned in, whispering, Loyalty dies the moment truth enters the room. We all just pretend not to notice. Later, alone in his study, Elias wrote again. She was not a woman. She was the voice of truth wearing a beautiful disguise. She didn't betray me. She only revealed that loyalty cannot exist without illusion. He paused, staring at the page. Then, as if hearing Nietzsche's whisper from the past, he added, perhaps the greatest tragedy of love is not when it ends, but when it becomes honest. That night, Celine left for good. No drama, no tears, just a quiet finality. Elias didn't chase her. He simply sat by the window and listened to the silence return. But this time, it didn't hurt. It felt clean. He finally understood. Loyalty demanded blindness. And now, for the first time, he could see the mirror of power. Where Elias begins exploring Nietzsche's idea that love is a struggle for dominance, not equality, and realizes how loyalty turns into control when love fades. Days melted into each other. Elias no longer waited for messages, calls, or footsteps in the hall. The ache that once consumed him had evolved into something colder, something sharper. He began to read differently. He didn't search for comfort anymore. He searched for understanding. Nietzsche wrote, "Love is a state in which a man sees things most decidedly as they are not." Elias underlined the sentence 3 times. Then he whispered, "So love is the first form of self-deception." The thought didn't depress him. It liberated him. He had spent months believing he was the victim of others. Amara's silence, Celine's freedom. But now, for the first time, he questioned his own role. Maybe it wasn't women who betrayed him. Maybe it was the illusion of control he had mistaken for connection. One evening, Elias attended a small philosophy symposium. The topic, power in human relationships. A young professor stood before the audience, speaking about how modern love is built on negotiation rather than devotion. People don't fall in love anymore, the professor said. They enter silent contracts of control, emotional, social, sexual. Each partner calculating how much they can give without losing leverage. Elias sat in the back, almost smiling. Every word sounded like a reflection of his own life. He remembered how Amara once said, "I love you because you make me feel safe." He had thought it was affection. Now he saw it for what it was. Dependency disguised as love. After the lecture, a woman approached him. Sharp eyes, confident smile. "You seemed unimpressed," she said. Elias chuckled softly. "Impressed enough to listen. Unimpressed enough to question." "Good," she said. "That's the start of real understanding." Her name was Helena, a writer, a student of Nietzsche's ethics. They talked about willpower, freedom, and the human hunger for dominance. But their conversation didn't feel academic. It felt intimate, charged. Helena wasn't flirtatious like Celine or soft like Amara. She was challenging, analytical, almost confrontational. "You still believe in love?" she asked. Elias hesitated. "I believe in connection. But love? Maybe it's just 2 people competing to see who surrenders first." Helena smiled faintly. "Then you've learned well." Nietzsche would approve. They began to meet often. Cafes turned into late-night debates, and debates turned into something that resembled closeness, but not the sentimental kind. Helena fascinated him. She didn't offer comfort. She provoked clarity. One night, as they walked along the empty streets, Helena stopped abruptly. "Tell me," she said, "do you think you were loyal to Amara or to the idea of owning her affection?" The question pierced through him. "I was loyal to what I wanted her to be," Elias admitted. Helena nodded. "Then your loyalty was a form of control?" "You weren't faithful. You were possessive. That's how men confuse love with power." Elias sighed. "And women," she smirked. "Women are no different. We manipulate through surrender. The weaker we appear, the more control we gain." Her words haunted him. He began to see the invisible games in every interaction. Gestures, pauses, even silences. Every "I miss you" carried strategy. Every "I forgive you" contained negotiation. He saw that love was never equal. One always gave more. One always ruled quietly. That night, Elias wrote in his journal, "Love is not 2 souls merging. It's 2 wills colliding, each testing who will kneel first. Weeks passed. His relationship with Helena deepened, though neither dared to call it love. They both understood the unspoken contract. They were equals only as long as neither submitted emotionally. But one evening as they shared dinner, Helena broke the rule. "I dreamt of you last night," she said suddenly. Elias looked up. "That's dangerous." She smiled. "Why?" "Because dreams make the strong sentimental," he said, "and sentiment is the first crack in power." Helena laughed quietly, but her eyes betrayed something softer. For a moment he saw vulnerability, fleeting, beautiful, and in that moment he felt powerful again. That's when Elias understood Nietzsche's cruel truth. Every love is a search for power over the beloved. He realized he had never stopped playing the game. He had only changed the rules. Before, he had loved to be needed. Now he needed to feel above needing. It wasn't love he wanted from Helena, it was submission. Proof that he had finally mastered what once destroyed him. But Helena wasn't Amara. She saw through him. One night she caught him staring, studying her. "You're not looking at me," she said. "You're measuring me." Elias said nothing. "You want to know how much of myself I'll give you," she continued. "You think that if you stay calm, detached, you'll never lose control again." He exhaled, slow and steady. "And isn't that what wisdom is? Learning to not lose yourself?" She shook her head. "No, Elias. That's just fear with a mask on." They sat in silence. Outside, the wind howled through the narrow streets, a low, haunting sound like an old memory returning. Helena's tone softened. "You think love made you weak? But it was your hunger for power that made you blind." Elias looked away. "So I should be powerless?" "No," she said. "You should be whole." "That's different." Her words lingered like smoke in the air. Later that night, Elias wrote again. "When a man fears losing control, he becomes what he hates. Manipulative, cautious, armored. He calls it wisdom, but it's just cowardice refined." He stared at the page, realizing that for the first time, he wasn't writing about Amara or Celine. He was writing about himself. Every woman had been a mirror, showing him his own reflection. He had mistaken reflection for betrayal. The truth was simpler and crueler. He had been at war not with women, but with his own weakness. The next morning, Helena left a note on his desk. It read, "You've learned what love isn't. Now learn what power is, and without someone to mirror it." She was gone. No goodbye, no promise of return, just silence and sunlight spilling through the window. For the first time, Elias didn't chase. He didn't break or curse or plead. He simply sat there, breathing. Because he understood now, love is not about possession, but perception. Power, when used to dominate, corrupts. But power, when used to know oneself, transforms. He looked out the window and whispered, "Thank you, Nietzsche, and thank you, Helena." Then he closed the notebook, not with pain, but with peace. In the next part, Elias confronts the paradox Nietzsche warned of, how devotion, even when pure, can become a trap when one loses individuality. It's where love meets philosophy and loyalty turns spiritual. The room was quieter than it had ever been. No Helena, no messages, just the hum of morning, the sound of a man finally alone with the truth. Elias didn't move for a long time. He simply watched the sunlight crawl slowly across the floor, as if time itself were hesitant to disturb his stillness. He thought of her last words. "You've learned what love isn't. Now learn what power is, without someone to mirror it." At first it sounded cryptic, but as the days unfolded, he began to see the meaning hidden beneath it. Every time he had loved, he had used another person as a mirror, to validate his worth, his dominance, his gentleness, his image of himself. He had never loved them for who they were. He had loved them for who he became in their eyes. Elias began to walk the city streets aimlessly. No destination, no agenda. He carried a small notebook in his pocket filled with Nietzsche's notes, scribbles, and fragments. He reread one line endlessly. "Beware of those who love you for your goodness. They will chain you to it." He paused in the middle of a park, repeating it under his breath. That was the trap, wasn't it? To be needed for your calm, your kindness, your loyalty. and then to become imprisoned by those very traits. Devotion wasn't always love. Sometimes it was a subtle form of possession. One evening, Elias wandered into an old monastery outside the city. The scent of incense and wax filled the hall. Candles flickered around a single figure, an aged monk, sitting cross-legged, eyes closed. Elias watched silently until the monk spoke without opening his eyes. "You seek peace, yet your eyes still chase ghosts." Elias smiled faintly. "You read me easily." "I've seen thousands like you," the monk said, "men who confuse devotion with disappearance. Tell me, who do you pray to, her or yourself?" Elias frowned. "I don't pray." "Then why do you carry her absence like scripture?" the monk asked softly. Elias had no answer. The monk stood and walked closer. "Young man, love without awareness becomes worship, and worship without truth becomes slavery." He gestured to the altar. "Even we monks run, we bow to the divine, but we never beg it to define us. Devotion should illuminate, not consume." Elias wrote those words down. He didn't fully understand them yet, but he felt their weight. Days turned into weeks. Elias began spending mornings in the monastery's garden, writing, thinking, sometimes just breathing. The garden wasn't beautiful in a traditional sense. It was wild, overgrown, unpolished. But it was alive. It reminded him of himself, once manicured, now real. He wrote in his notebook, "Devotion is not the loss of self. It is the meeting of two complete selves who choose not to devour each other." And then beneath it, "Most men call their chains loyalty." He thought of Amara again, how she once told him, "You make me whole." At the time it had melted him. Now it chilled him. Wholeness, he realized, should never come from another person. If it did, it wasn't wholeness. It was dependency wearing perfume. One afternoon, as Elias was leaving the monastery gates, a familiar figure stood waiting near the road. Celine, the same woman who once shattered him with silence. She looked unchanged, graceful, mysterious, untouchable. "Elias," she said softly, "you look different." "I am," he replied, finally. She tilted her head. "So, no anger left for me?" He smiled gently. "No anger. Just understanding." They walked together through the quiet woods nearby. Celine spoke of her travels, her solitude, her regrets. But Elias noticed something. She wasn't here for closure. She was here to test whether he still needed her. "Do you ever miss what we had?" she asked. Elias paused, then said, "I miss who I was before I mistook attachment for love." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Not with anger, but recognition. "You've grown," she whispered, "but you've also built walls." He nodded. "Walls are better than cages." She smiled sadly. "And yet both keep love out." Elias looked away. "Only false love fears walls." They stood in silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Celine took a step closer. "So this is what you've become? Untouchable?" Elias met her gaze. "Not untouchable, just unowned." For the first time, she didn't have a reply. The power she once held over him dissolved like mist in the evening air. She reached out to touch his face. He didn't move away, but he didn't lean in either. When she finally turned to leave, she said softly, "Maybe that's what I loved about you, Elias. The part of you I could never truly have." And she was gone, like the echo of a song that no longer hurt. That night, Elias sat beneath the open sky. He stared at the stars, thinking about all the women who had passed through his life. Each one had played a role in his awakening. Amara taught him the pain of idealism. Celine taught him the seduction of freedom. Helena taught him the depth of power. But devotion, real devotion, and was what he was learning now. Not to another person, but to truth. He whispered Nietzsche's words to the wind, "Become who you are." It struck him now, not as a call to ego, but to integrity, to love without losing oneself, to serve truth, not emotion, to stay rooted, even in surrender. Elias finally understood what the monk had meant. Love was not the absence of power. It was the harmony between power and humility. Every time he had tried to own someone, he had lost them. Every time he had tried to serve someone blindly, he had lost himself. True devotion wasn't about staying or leaving. It was about remaining true, even when desire demanded compromise. He wrote in his notebook, "Love is sacred only when both hearts are free. Anything else is worship built on fear." He closed his eyes and felt a deep, wordless peace. In the days that followed, Elias became almost invisible in the city. No longer the man of influence or sorrow, but something quieter, rarer. He no longer needed to explain his calmness or defend his solitude. He finally understood that the opposite of weakness wasn't control, it was clarity. And in that clarity, devotion was no longer a shadow, it was a light. In the next chapter, Elias faces the hardest truth yet, that most people don't seek love, but escape from loneliness. Nietzsche's final lesson will strip away even the illusion of soulmates, leaving only raw, self-owned freedom. The first thing Elias noticed was how silent everything had become. No voices, no texts, no memories demanding to be replayed. Even the ache, that familiar undercurrent of longing, had softened into something else. Not joy, not sorrow, just stillness. It was frightening at first. Humans, he realized, fear silence more than pain. Pain makes us feel alive. Silence only reminds us of the void beneath everything. But Elias stayed with it. He didn't fill it with noise or people or purpose. He simply let it breathe. Weeks passed. Elias had stopped writing, stopped reading even Nietzsche. He wanted to meet life without filters. No philosophy, no theory, no past. One morning he stood before his mirror. His reflection looked back, older, thinner, but strangely calm. For a long while he didn't move. Then something strange happened. His mind whispered, "Who are you when no one needs you?" The question struck like a blade. For years, every identity he had ever worn, lover, thinker, student, son, had depended on someone else's gaze. He was always somebody to someone. Now, without the mirror of relationships, the ego began to collapse. And with it came the most dangerous freedom of all. That night, Elias dreamt of Nietzsche. They were sitting in an endless field of white fog. The philosopher's eyes burned with the same feverish light found in his writings, a kind of sacred madness. Nietzsche spoke first. "So, Elias, you've destroyed devotion, pride, dependence, yet you still cling to one illusion." Elias frowned. "Which one?" "The illusion," Nietzsche said softly, "that love must justify life." Elias blinked. "But without love, what meaning remains?" Nietzsche smiled, not cruelly, but with pity. "That question," he said, "is the root of all weakness. You ask for meaning because you're afraid to face the possibility that there is none." The fog thickened around them. Elias's heart raced. "Then why love at all?" "Because," Nietzsche said, "it is the art of creating meaning despite its absence. But remember, the artist must never worship his art." Elias tried to grasp it, but the words felt like smoke, slipping through his mind. Before disappearing, Nietzsche whispered, "The strongest love is the one that survives the death of illusion." Days later, Elias found himself walking along a riverbank, a thin layer of mist floating over the water. He met a man sitting alone, maybe in his 60s, wearing tattered clothes and a quiet smile. He looked like a drifter, yet there was something luminous about him. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the man said, nodding toward the river. Elias nodded. "It moves without asking where." The man chuckled. "Like life." They spoke for a while, of love, solitude, meaning. Elias confessed everything, the heartbreaks, the philosophies, the years spent chasing understanding. The man listened patiently, then said, "You've spent your life trying to turn pain into wisdom. Admirable, but sometimes the lesson is not to understand. It's to stop bleeding where there's no wound left." Elias fell silent. The words struck deeper than any lecture. The man continued, "You talk like someone who wants to stop suffering, but also refuses to let go of it. Maybe you're in love with your pain." Elias looked away. "It's all I've ever known." The man smiled gently. "Then maybe it's time to learn peace." When Elias turned to reply, the stranger was gone. Only ripples on the river remained. That night, Elias sat by the window as rain began to fall. He felt an ache rise, not for anyone in particular, but for something lost inside himself. He whispered to the dark, "If I stop needing love, do I stop being human?" A voice, perhaps his own, perhaps memory, answered, "No. You begin being real." He thought of all the illusions that had shaped him, that love would save him, that wisdom would protect him, that understanding would bring peace. Each one had been a mask for fear, the fear of emptiness. He finally realized he had not been chasing love. He had been running from loneliness. Elias did something that night he had never done before. He let the illusion die. He sat on the floor, eyes closed, and whispered every name he had ever loved: Amara, Celine, Helena, and then whispered his own. He forgave them all, not because they deserved it, but because he no longer needed the story that kept him tied to them. Tears came, not from sorrow, but from release. It felt like watching an entire life burn down quietly. Every should, every if only, every identity collapsing into ash. And in that ruin a strange beauty appeared. Nothing left to prove, nothing left to protect. Just life, bare, uncertain, raw. He fell asleep there, on the floor, and dreamt of water flowing endlessly through him. When Elias awoke, dawn light filled the room. It felt weightless. He walked outside barefoot, feeling the cold earth beneath his feet. The air smelled of wet grass and renewal. For the first time, he didn't think about who he should be. He simply was. He sat under a tree, closed his eyes, and felt the pulse of life, no longer seeking meaning, no longer fearing its absence. And then he smiled, a small, unforced smile, the kind that comes when a long war ends quietly. Weeks later, Elias wrote one final letter. To no one in particular. It was never meant to be sent. I've chased shadows for so long that I forgot what light feels like. I thought love was about finding someone to share the emptiness with, but it's about learning to dance within it alone. I no longer want eternal love, only honest moments. I no longer want purpose, only presence. I've stopped asking life to mean something. It simply is. And that is enough. He placed the letter in his notebook, beneath Nietzsche's final line. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Elias whispered, and he who no longer needs a why has found peace. Months later, he returned to the same hill where he once watched the city lights with Helena. But this time, he didn't come to remember. He came to let go. The city still buzzed with noise and ambition, but it no longer called to him. He was beyond the drama of human hunger, not detached but awake. He whispered to the wind, I don't want forever. I want real, and somewhere deep inside, a door opened, not to heaven or enlightenment, but to ordinary peace. He smiled again, not the smile of triumph, but of quiet acceptance. The illusion had died, and with it, so had the man who needed illusions. What remained was something purer, not saintly, not heroic, simply whole. Love your fate, for it is yours. Do not beg the universe for meaning. Be the meaning Elias finally understood. Love wasn't something to be found. It was something to be lived, fearlessly, fleetingly, without guarantee. The death of illusion was not the end of love. It was its purification, because only when the dream dies can the truth begin to breathe. Here, Elias emerges into a new kind of existence, one rooted in peace, not pursuit. It's where Nietzsche's final lesson turns from philosophy to poetry, how to live after enlightenment, quietly, humanly, beautifully. The sun rose slowly that morning, not in triumph, but in peace. No fanfare, no dramatic music, just the sound of birds, a gentle breeze brushing across the tall grass, and Elias sitting beneath an old oak tree with a notebook on his lap. It had been months since the night he burned his illusions, and in that silence, something new had begun to grow. Not excitement, not passion, but clarity. He had not become stronger or colder. He had simply become real. Elias lived now in a small house at the edge of the woods. He taught philosophy at a local college, though he rarely mentioned Nietzsche anymore. He spoke softly, listened deeply, and when asked about truth, he would only smile. One day a student asked him, "Professor, what's the most important thing you've learned about love?" Elias paused for a long moment, looking out the window at the falling leaves. Then he said, "That it's not about being chosen. It's about being awake." The class went silent. Most didn't understand, but a few, those who had known heartbreak, nodded quietly. For Elias, that was enough. It happened on an ordinary evening. Elias was walking home from the bookstore, arms full of books and bread, when he heard a familiar laugh. He turned, and there she was. Not Helena, not Amara, but someone who carried that same effortless glow of curiosity and calm. A stranger, yet somehow not a stranger. They spoke, at first casually, the weather, books, music, then silence. Not awkward, just alive. The kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. Before they parted, she smiled and said, "You seem like someone who's made peace with ghosts." Elias chuckled. "Only the loud ones." She laughed again and walked away. He didn't chase her, didn't ask for her number, didn't even turn to watch her go. Because this time, he wasn't trying to make a story. He was simply living one. Weeks later, Elias returned to the riverbank where he had once met the old drifter. The mist hung low again, soft and weightless. He sat by the water and closed his eyes. This time, there was no grief, no yearning, only gratitude. He remembered Nietzsche's words, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." He smiled. The chaos had birthed something quiet, not a star, but a still flame that no wind could touch. He dipped his hand into the cold water. It flowed through his fingers freely, like time, like memory, like forgiveness. That night, as he sat by the fire, Elias wrote in his journal one last time, "Once I believed love was a promise, a vow of eternal loyalty. Now I see it as a presence, fleeting, beautiful, and free. The loyalty I wanted from women, I had to find within myself, because no one betrays us more than the part of us that still refuses to grow." He paused, then continued, "Nietzsche was right. The tragedy of modern love is not unfaithfulness, but unconsciousness. We don't see people as they are. We see them as medicine for our wounds. But when the wound heals, we mistake peace for boredom and run again." He closed the book and whispered, "No more running." That night, Elias dreamt again. But this dream was different. He found himself walking through a garden bathed in soft moonlight. At the center stood a woman in white. Not a lover, not a ghost, but an archetype. The eternal feminine Nietzsche once called the great seducer of meaning. She looked at him with calm, knowing eyes. "Do you still fear me?" she asked. Elias shook his head. "No, you were never the danger. My illusions were." She smiled. "Then you finally understood?" He asked, "Was the pain necessary?" Her gaze softened. "Always. Without it, you would have worshipped comfort instead of truth." Then she stepped closer, placed her hand on his chest and said, "Love is not loyalty to another. It's loyalty to what's alive inside you." The dream faded into dawn. When Elias awoke, sunlight filled the room. He made tea, opened the window, and let the light touch his face. There was no sadness, no urgency, only a sense of simple belonging. He wrote 3 words on the first page of a new notebook. "Nothing to prove." Then he walked outside. The trees whispered softly. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the hum of distant life, felt like part of one great rhythm. And for the first time in years, Elias didn't analyze it. He didn't need to. He simply listened and understood. Months later, Elias was invited to give a public talk in the city, the same city where his illusions were born and broken. The topic, what philosophy teaches us about love. He began with silence. The audience waited. Then with a gentle smile, he said, "Philosophy doesn't teach us what love is. It teaches us what it's not. Love is not a contract. Love is not control. Love is not owed. It is a mirror, one that forces us to meet the parts of ourselves we hide." He looked out at the crowd, eyes soft but unshaken. We keep asking for loyalty from others because we haven't yet become loyal to truth. And when we finally do, we stop begging for forever. We begin to live fully, fearlessly, beautifully, in now. When the hall erupted in applause, Elias didn't feel pride. He just felt gratitude. For the first time, he understood Nietzsche not as a rebel, but as a healer who used fire instead of comfort. After the talk, Elias walked alone through the same park he once crossed with Helena years ago. The benches, the trees, even the fading street lamps, all the same, yet none of it felt heavy anymore. He passed a couple holding hands, laughing, and for the first time in his life, he didn't envy them. He didn't romanticize them either. He just smiled, as one might at sunlight, knowing it will set soon but rise again tomorrow. He sat by the fountain, took a deep breath and whispered, "Loyalty was never about her staying. It was about me not leaving myself." That night, as Elias drifted into sleep, he dreamed of Nietzsche one last time. No fog this time, just clear, endless sky. Nietzsche stood before him, smiling faintly. "You've learned well, Elias." Elias nodded. "I've learned that truth doesn't comfort." Nietzsche's eyes softened. "It's not meant to. Truth doesn't hold you. It sets you down alone. But in that aloneness, you find everything." Elias smiled back. "Then the journey was worth it." Nietzsche nodded once. "Now live, without worship, without fear. Be loyal only to what is real." The dream dissolved into dawn. Elias awoke with the first light of morning touching his face. He walked to the mirror one last time and smiled. No grand transformation, no mystical awakening, just a man finally at peace with being human. He picked up his violin, the same one he once played in heartbreak, and began to play a soft melody. Not of love lost or found, but of life itself. Outside, the wind carried the sound through the trees, and if one listened closely, they could almost hear Nietzsche's echo in the distance. "Become who you are." Elias smiled, because at last he was. Loyalty is not proven by another's faithfulness. It's proven by your refusal to betray your own truth. Even when love fades, people change, and illusions die. Real strength isn't in conquering women, nor in rejecting love. It's in seeing clearly and still choosing to love freely. That's what Nietzsche meant when he said, "What is done out of love takes place beyond good and evil."